Picture living in a home with 8 matching sides, or one built entirely from glossy enameled steel panels. Here are 10 house styles that were once widespread across the United States but are rarely built anymore.
The octagon house craze took off in the mid-1800s, largely thanks to Orson Squire Fowler, who argued that 8-sided homes made better use of light, airflow, and floor space than standard rectangular houses. For the same perimeter, an octagon enclosed roughly 20% more interior area, making the design both economical and efficient. These homes commonly had flat roofs, topped with a central cupola, sweeping wraparound porches, and clever built-in systems for heating and collecting water. Even so, the trend never really caught on nationwide, and it had mostly disappeared by the early 1900s. A handful of well-preserved octagons remain, including Longwood in Mississippi and the Octagon House in Watertown, Wisconsin. Fowler's own extravagant octagonal residence, nicknamed Fowler's Folly, was eventually deserted and torn down in 1897. Queen Anne architecture swept the U.S. from roughly 1880 to 1910, taking over from the French-influenced Second Empire style. It's recognized by irregular, asymmetrical facades, sprawling porches, ornate woodwork, patterned shingles, and turrets. The American version leaned more playful and elaborate than its British counterpart, with varied rooflines and lots of decorative flourishes. The look showed up everywhere, from city row houses to grand estates to modest cottages, before losing steam after 1900, as the plainer colonial revival style took hold. Certain elements, like the wraparound porch, lingered into the 1920s. The style's best-known showcase is the Carson Mansion in Eureka, California, often cited as one of the most photographed Victorian homes in America.
Popular from the mid-1890s through the late 1930s, the American Foursquare pushed back against the ornamentation of Victorian design in favor of something simpler and more functional. These were typically 2.5-story homes with a boxy, square footprint, ideal for making the most of narrow city lots. Also called the Prairie Box, it borrowed several cues from Frank Lloyd Wright's Prairie style, often including a wide front porch, a hipped roof with a central dormer, and Craftsman-inspired built-in cabinetry. Many Foursquares were sold as mail-order kits, with companies like Sears and Aladdin shipping pre-cut lumber for buyers to assemble themselves. The style thrived, especially in Midwestern cities and streetcar suburbs that needed affordable housing fast.
The Craftsman style grew out of the early 20th century arts and crafts movement, prizing handmade details and natural materials. It found its biggest following in California, where compact single-family homes, known as California bungalows, spread rapidly. Drawing on both the prairie and shingle styles, Craftsman houses typically featured low-slung roofs, visible structural beams, and custom-built furniture. Gustav Stickley helped fuel the movement through his publication, the Craftsman magazine. Unlike its British roots, the American take made handcrafted homes accessible to middle-class buyers. The style faded out by the 1930s as newer architectural movements took over. The Gamble House in Pasadena, built in 1908-1909 by the firm Green & Green, remains one of its most celebrated examples.
Long and narrow, shotgun houses were a common sight across the South from the late 1800s into the 1920s. Usually just about 12 feet wide, they lined up their rooms in a single row with no connecting hallway, hence the nickname, since a bullet fired through the front door could theoretically travel straight out the back. The design is thought to trace back to New Orleans, shaped by Haitian and West African architectural traditions from the early 1800s. Shotgun houses were cheap to build and allowed for dense housing in fast-growing cities, often packed tightly together to save land and catch cross breezes in the heat. Many fell apart during mid-century urban renewal, though gentrification has brought renewed interest in restoring them. Elvis Presley's birthplace in Tupelo, Mississippi is a shotgun house that's now a museum.
Also called mock Tudor, this style took off in the early 1900s, drawing on medieval English homes for inspiration. It's marked by steeply pitched roofs, decorative half-timbering, and tall brick chimneys. Affluent Americans in the 1920s and 30s gravitated toward Tudor revival homes, particularly in upscale suburbs, drawn to the sense of old-world craftsmanship and history it conveyed. Suburbs of New York City, Westchester County, Inglewood, and Rye among them, still hold many examples from that era. The style lost momentum after World War II as more streamlined, efficient home designs took over, and by the 1970s and 80s, builders were recreating the look with synthetic materials instead of genuine timber.
Part of a broader early 1900s wave of nostalgia for colonial-era architecture, the Dutch colonial revival is easiest to spot by its gambrel roof, the barn-like double-sloped shape, paired with deep overhanging eaves. It took cues from the original Dutch settler homes, built in the 1600s and 1700s throughout New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Where those early houses were stone or brick, the revival versions were usually wood-sided, with large dormer windows for extra light and space, a balanced facade, a centered front door, and decorative shutters. The style held on through the 1930s, particularly in the Northeast. One of its most notorious examples is 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York, the house at the center of the Amityville horror story.
Lustron houses were prefabricated, all-steel homes built in the late 1940s to help ease the housing crunch after World War II. Industrialist Carl Strandlin designed them as sturdy, low-upkeep alternatives to conventional wood-frame houses, with each one assembled from a kit of more than 3,000 enameled steel parts. Lustron intended to mass-produce tens of thousands of these homes, but the company collapsed into bankruptcy by 1950 due to financial troubles and government pressure. Still, over 2,000 were completed, and many survive today. They were built for easy upkeep, with metal interior walls, built-in storage, and even a combined clothes and dishwashing appliance. Some units were even shipped to Venezuela for oil workers.
The Atomic Ranch was a mid-century spin on the traditional ranch house, marrying its low, sprawling form with sleek modern touches and open interiors. Architect Cliff May is credited with popularizing the ranch house style in the 1930s, taking inspiration from California's Spanish colonial homes. By the 1950s, ranch-style houses accounted for roughly 9 out of every 10 new homes built in America, prized for being both affordable and practical. Atomic ranch homes stood out with oversized picture windows, clear story windows, and flat or butterfly-shaped rooflines that blurred the line between indoors and out, along with bold color choices and space-age flourishes. Builder Joseph Eichler was among the most prominent names, spreading the style throughout California.
Brutalism emerged in the 1950s and gained real traction through the 60s and 70s, defined by exposed raw concrete, bold geometric forms, and a stripped-down aesthetic with almost no ornamentation. The movement took its cues from modernist architects like Le Corbusier and prioritized function above all else. It was frequently used for social housing and university buildings, especially in countries where concrete came to symbolize equality and public investment. By the late 1970s, though, the style had fallen out of favor as it became linked in the public mind with urban decay and cold, impersonal design. Even so, a number of brutalist buildings are now regarded as culturally significant and protected as landmarks. Contrary to popular assumption, brutalism doesn't come from the word brutal. It derives from the French phrase béton brut, meaning raw concrete.
If you could bring back one of these home styles, which would it be? Drop your pick in the comments below.